So let's start by just talking about the conference as a whole. What did you think? What did you get out of it? How did you find it?
Loved it. Really loved it. It was great on lots of different areas, really, for networking, seeing current clients, but also seeing new clients, bonding as a team with all us guys that went, the general conferences themselves, the talks, and being in Dublin was amazing.
Yeah,
We had a good time.
it had all the key ingredients of learning, networking, bonding, Guinness. Yeah, I think it had it all. What about you, Gemma?
Yeah, absolutely loved it. Met some brilliant people, had some really interesting conversations. Yeah, just had a brilliant time.
I think the thing I really liked the best was it was my first time at EuroSense, and just the atmosphere of the place. Everybody's there to learn.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like a very salesy conference. No one's pushing any agendas really. It's just everybody sharing their latest knowledge and also listening to other people doing that. So I think, it's a really, really good atmosphere for learning and enjoying all things sensory and product. So yeah, very highly recommend it. So what we'll do over the next 15 minutes or so, we'll talk through some of these themes, and then we'll try and pull out 3 top tips for 2025 based on them, and what we think people should be thinking about in terms of doing things differently next year, planning studies and such. So let's start with beyond liking. It's one of those phrases that I think I first heard it years and years ago in a fragrance context. But what does it actually mean? Like, what are people talking about at the conference? What are the specifics of it?
And for me, it's so we always have overall liking as one of your main questions, and it's typically particularly in product testing anyway, it tends to be always the key success criteria or action standard, whatever language you use, but it's always top 2 box 70% overall liking, or top 2 box 80%, whatever your action standard is. It's always based on overall liking, and yet there might be a few more of the success criteria on there, but it's always the liking that we want to get. And I think there's evidence now. I think a lot of clients have got evidence that they might have got their success criteria brilliant. They might have got, to 80% top 2 box, but then the product might have bombed out there in the market, and it's like, why should we have looked beyond that top 2 box of liking? Beyond liking. The questions are there in the questionnaire. Like, we just need to make sure we're now using them as part of that success criteria. So have beyond liking, of course, but what else needs to be on that success criteria to make that product succeed in market, whether it be fragrance, texture, ergonomics, and all of those things.
Yeah, it's really interesting because if you sort of on a human level, like if you were setting up a study from scratch and you wanted to know if a product was going to be successful, you wouldn't probably make your main headline metric liking, because firstly, liking is such a bland phrase. Like, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what will you do about it? And there's a lot more other factors that are going to influence whether people purchase it or whether it does the job that it needs to do. And yet, because it's such an easy measure and such a replicable measure, it just became the one by default, and it just gets used on every single measure. So it's really important to challenge that status quo, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think some of those metrics are so clear in terms of, I like it, I really like it, and I'd love to buy it, but I probably can't afford it, but I really like it.
Yeah.
Or I'd really like it, but it's not accessible where I live, or, those kind of things that are quite big, key things that attribute to whether somebody will actually go out and buy it or not, even though they like it.
And I think a lot of studies have shown that overall liking correlates really, really highly with purchase intent, because a lot of people would use purchase intent instead of overall liking. But actually, even purchase intent doesn't mean that if someone gets a high purchase intent, doesn't mean they're actually going to buy it in store. So it's always going beyond liking and PI as a measure.
Yeah. I think we are using a lot of them already in our questionnaires. We just need to pull it into the main success criteria metrics for me. So, for
there's
example,
loads on there beyond liking.
like if we take open ends, for example, we always have open ends. Do we really, really use them to the best of their ability, if you like? So if you have got flat data or you've not quite achieved your success criteria, are you really looking at those open ends? Because those open ends can really differentiate the consumers. You can really use those to pull out the insight beyond your closed data. I think that's one area.
Yeah, I think a lot of research is guilty of just using the open ends to support the story that's told by the key measures, rather than actually using them to diagnose. So that's definitely something we could do differently.
Yeah.
And we're going to come on to this later, but that is one area where AI is already helping a lot, because it brings precision and sort of rigor to open-end analysis.
And the sentiment to it.
Like, when done well, you can start to analyse this data en masse in detail that we couldn't do just a few years ago. So that's definitely one area. There were other things as well that were topical at the conference, weren't there? So neuroscience metrics, emojis, looking at different ways to find scales for different cultures. Like, all of that is about the same thing, about trying to go beyond the
attributes.
Metric.
Like your kata question, your catch-all apply it. If you've got a product, whether particularly if it's like a sensory product, like, what are those attributes that you're looking for out of that product? And I think you have to really maybe use so that those attributes, your top 3 attributes, should be in your success criteria for that product.
Yeah, agree. And I think you're right that our questionnaires do include a lot of these diagnostics that are beyond liking anyway, but there's also additional things that we can bring in that are kind of more like new technology, things like the implicit questions. And we can use the emotional descriptors from the kata list in that kind of style, where people rapidly have to say if they like, well, how does it work again? If you like click if you associate
the attribute flashes up, and
if you associate it with the product or not. That helps you then create a profile of a product that's beyond liking by showing you the kind of emotional attributes that underpin it.
And it's more system 1 thinking. It's quick.
Well, as close to system 1 as we can get in research.
That's the line.
Yeah.
I saw one interesting one, which was NPS. So we've talked a lot about NPS in different contexts, and there's always a debate about whether it works. But it was there was an interesting piece of work demonstrating that it had quite a bit of power in terms of differentiating products, because it brings a bit of social, what's the word for
pressure.
Risk? Social risk or pressure. There's a fancy word for that, but I'll come back to it. But yeah, because it brings a bit of social, like, I like it enough to recommend it to someone. Like, that puts a bit of skin in the game and creates a bit more power if you're winning on that metric, which I thought was really interesting. Like,
because you only think of it from a service. Well, I would think of it from a service point of view, or typically, but why not?
Yeah, that's definitely one to have a play with. Why do we relentlessly use liking then? If we've heard this theme of beyond liking for years and years, like, why are we so still? As not just Blue Yonder or our clients, but as an industry, why is it on every questionnaire we do?
I mean, it's a key dominator question for, is that the right word? Dominator question for your key drivers, and, to be able to run dependent. That's it. That's what I was looking for. To be able to run your advanced analysis.
It's just such a good headline metric. Yeah. It's just such a useful, simple metric to model everything else up, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think when it's been used for so long, it would be really hard for a client to suddenly switch to something else, because they like to refer back to previous products and they've got that huge database usually. So it would take quite a lot to shift from overall liking.
And I honestly don't think you need to shift. No. I just think you need to make sure...
Bring in other things.
To make those business decisions, not just based on liking.
I mean, that's why the whole debate is beyond and not replacing. Yes. It's just looking beyond it, I saw another talk, which... Again, I forget who it was, but I really agreed with, which was just like, take a step back from it. It's never about using any metric for the sake of it. It's like start with the objective. Something we've seen when we've done our campaign for real innovation interviews with various clients. It's like, start with what the product is supposed to do in the portfolio. Yeah. And then look at the metrics you need. And basically that'll lead you to a toolkit, won't it? Yeah. And you pick and choose.
Yeah. And helps you with your claims as well, because if it's not a claims piece, having that information and knowing that attribute of that product is coming out and it's doing what it's supposed to do, and then helps you then build your claims from that as well.
Yeah. It's basically never starting with a metric. Like, that's not the best way to to design any research, is it? It's starting with your objective, obviously, and then working back from there. However, you do need to be able to model dependent variables, and you do need to fill in your benchmarking and your normative databases. So that's the rub, essentially, isn't it?
Yeah. Can you picture a world without overall liking in a survey?
I don't want to. It's scary.
Yeah, it's frightening, isn't it? Should be like a Halloween themed podcast.
Yeah.
I mean, that sort of moves us on to another topic, which was agility and the need for discipline in agility, which admittedly was something Blue Yonder was talking about in its session. But just how important it is if you want to do agile research and get quicker. One of the ingredients of that is discipline in creating some consistency in your questionnaires, picking the right headline metrics, and then being able to model back from them. Yeah. So obviously, being a research conference, there were dozens and dozens of presentations on AI. Thoughts on where we are with the AI contribution?
I think everyone's dabbling in AI, but I think people don't always know how best to use it right now. I think it's still quite a new and shiny thing that people get very excited by, but its application needs some refinement, I think, in the industry. I think we're using it in a really good ways with the open ends. We're using it as a tool to get better insight faster, and we currently use it where it's appropriate, so not all the time. We don't just roll it out. But it is really helping us, especially with the open ends in the analysis that we do. There are huge benefits that go beyond traditionally before then we were doing manual coding. So using AI now helps us do it so much quicker, but also so much more detailed. So we're getting to know what 1 or 2% of consumers are saying, whereas before we would have only coded 5% or above, or even 10% more. So we're getting to find those real nuances in the data and help find those edges that we're looking for in the analysis.
So that is probably the best application that I can think of in terms of doing things both quicker and better. That gets you to something that you couldn't do before, that open-ended analysis.
And of course we've got the sentiment analysis that overlays as well, which we weren't able to do before, which is great because it gives you an overview level, just the positive and negative neutral breakdown, and it means actually we can just ask one open end. So typically before in product testing surveys, we'd ask open end, what do you like about the product and what do you dislike? And by asking it like that, you're forcing consumers to say a positive and a negative when they might not really feel like they dislike anything. So it's better to just ask overall, what do you think of the product? And then you're not leading consumers in any way. And that's where the sentiment analysis is great, because then you overlay that and you see immediately the kind of proportion of consumers who are positive or negative about the product.
And I think we do get clients, don't we, that worry about the quality, and we're still getting the quality that we would get from manually doing it, but we do still do a manual check, don't we? So to check that the quality is still there, because I think that's so important, isn't it? We want to make sure that we're not missing anything.
Yeah, definitely. We will always check 20% of the coding done by the AI, and the AI platform itself gives a quality score, so we've got a minimum threshold on that. And actually we do deliver the whole dashboard to clients so they can see the tagging that's gone behind the coding from the AI itself.
That's
so
really great.
They then get that reassurance that it's been done properly.
Yeah.
And
they get to see more that way of the open ends, so the verbatims.
Yeah, it's brilliant. The dashboards that we can give are really, really good. You can click on a theme and then it just automatically pops up all the verbatims that are related to that theme in one go. So it's much nicer than just getting a raw verbatim Excel file for clients to sift through themselves.
Yeah.
I think the reason we end up focusing on open data is just because that is the one area, and whether it's text, like mass text analytics, or even voice to text, it's all open data. Like that's the one area where it's really allowed us to do something that we couldn't do before. I think there's still this sense when you go to an AI talk at a conference of like, it's really interesting and we love it and we love new things, but has it really, could you not have learnt that using e.g. a focus group? Like, has that really taken you somewhere different? A lot of the time it's taken you somewhere faster, which raises all sorts of interesting questions in terms of the sort of insight model in general. But the examples of tangible advancement in insight are pretty thin on the ground, actually, with the exception of open data. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, Absolutely. I think anything that we're using at the moment, AI, is to help us get somewhere quicker, or tools, rather than doing the job for us or getting the insight for us, if you like. Does that make sense?
So far. I mean, the other one that I love, which is not really relevant to this, but is just image. Obviously, like being able to create stimulus.
Mood boards and things like that.
We've done a lot of that. Just concepts that you can, like some of the stuff you can create using the imagery is incredible, and videos for that matter. So like still in that sort of really interesting, let's keep playing, let's not pretend that we know all the answers.
No,
and experiment phase. I think
having a play is a really good way of putting it, because these tools are out there. They're out there for a reason.
Yeah,
we should embrace using them. They might not all work, but you don't know until you try.
Yeah, I think I see our role as an agency as like trying to filter it for our clients. Like we do a lot of playing with them, and of the ones that we show to clients, there's probably another 2 that we haven't bothered with. But I think that's quite an important phase to go through, is to fill it out and find the good stuff. Should we talk about culture? That was one of the other big topics. Yeah. So really interesting, because like personally I've seen a lot about culture just in terms of understanding people in general in research. But products and how people relate to scales and respond to product questions across cultures, that was an interesting one.
Yeah, it was really interesting, and something that I think I'll take forwards in the research that I'm doing from now on. It raised some really good points around, because we're doing more and more research across the world now in all various markets, not just the UK and the US, but many, many other markets as well. And the point that they made was it's really important to consider the market and the culture when you're writing that questionnaire. I think we're quite guilty of writing a questionnaire for one market and then just translating it and just sending it out to another market and thinking it's suitable. Whereas actually they raise the point that quite often, say for example a scale, the negative end of a scale won't actually work in some markets, or they don't know what the labels actually mean. So when you translate it, your data quality isn't going to be there. So you can't just do that. Whereas instead you should use maybe a 5-point scale or a 3-point scale in those markets to get the right data. So what they suggested was actually bringing in the translations team or your local fieldwork partners in that market into the research process a lot earlier. So get their help and input into writing the questionnaire and taking their feedback on board, almost in the same way that you'd send a questionnaire to the client to get their feedback. We should be doing the same thing with the local fieldwork team.
I think that's so interesting, and not just from a scale point of view, but from a wording point of view. So if you're testing some food or something very, I don't know, there's got a lot of sensorials, I don't know, I'm thinking of a word here, but creaminess or
that was one they used.
Is that one that they use? Like, how does that translate in another country, or it might not even translate?
Totally different things in different markets.
No, exactly. So I think getting that advice up front is something we definitely need to get better at doing.
And I think the reason why we use the same scales across different markets is because clients like that consistency, and they can compare an overall liking score from China to the US, but actually that's meaningless if the scale doesn't work in that market. So
you want to be confident that your data is right in that market, and you're only going to get that if your scales and your questions are right as well.
It's very interesting that, because it's another one of those like beyond liking debate. Is like when you say it out loud, obviously, of course, but the reasons that, not just say we collectively as researchers, the reasons that we don't do that are really practical. Like basically, as you say, you want to be able to compare A versus B versus C market on the same. But if C market hasn't understood the scale or is thinking something completely different, then we're really kidding ourselves as an industry, aren't we? And it's messy. Like, say there is a culture that just doesn't do a scale in that way and you have to create a different one. You're then going to have to map it back, aren't you, in the final reporting? But ultimately it's a step you probably should do. And you should be braver about doing that collectively as an industry, right?
I think there's definitely those markets where you get, you're going to get courtesy bias. So look at your scales to make sure that it's hard for them to be so positive. That's just one example, but we know of that already. So.
And it takes us neatly back to discipline, because if you're asking the same areas in the right way for each market, then you obviously quickly get your norms built up, and it's really easy to benchmark it. But if you constantly chopping and changing, or just starting afresh with every project, which does happen, then you can't. Yeah.
Just makes sense, doesn't it, when you say it out loud?
Yeah, exactly. And yet here we are. So yeah, that's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
It's just, I suppose it's just challenging thinking, like if you're working across countries, to what extent have you taken into account that people might answer things differently?
Yeah.
And if you honestly can't say that you have, then you probably should.
It might take a bit more time in the kind of questionnaire design and setup phase of the research, but I think it's really important to actually do that.
Yeah. What else did we talk about? We talked about sustainability is probably the other big topic that came up. But it was really heartening to see that in product development and sensory testing, sustainability is really at the forefront of what a lot of people are doing. It's encouraging, I think, that government incentives and government mandates do seem to work, and like product development seems to be on the front line of like, seriously, we've got to do this, let's get on with it. So there were some really good things there. What do you recall about that topic of sustainability?
I think...
Was it just me that went to those ones?
I didn't go to that talk, but I think you're right. And there was a lot of people talking about sustainability. So when we were like talking to clients, just networking, sustainability came up a lot in their top takeaways of the conference as well. Yeah. So I think that, and also just generally, we are talking to clients a lot about sustainability, particularly around packaging. So I think it's high on everyone's agenda right now.
That, and every talk I went to, and for obvious reasons, sustainability was packaging focused. And it's basically, how can you get, we know very well what works in packaging in most categories by now. So it's like, how can you get the same outcomes and benefits in a more sustainable and better for the environment way? Easier said than done, because generally it costs more money. So
I think it's a real challenge, but it's so interesting. We're having so many different types of briefs coming through on it, this particular topic. So it's great to see it back, I think. Yeah,
I think it's a really key role that research can play in that. It's not, there's a more sustainable way and there's a cheaper way, and that's quite easy to understand. Ultimately, it will be consumers that decide what works and flies in market. So that's where research is so critical, because we're the link between what business thinks should work and what actually will work. So I think that sort of covered it. I mean, we could easily sit here chatting about it for a lot longer. It was a couple of weeks ago now, so it's really good to go back into it. It's going to be now interesting to see where the Beyond Liking goes, because we're talking about it with clients already. Sustainability, I think, definitely. And I think culture's obviously never going to go away. We just need to, I think there's some really great things we can put in place straight away. Yeah, so let's try and wrap it up then. If we wanted to get practical, we were going to think of one thing each for clients and researchers to think about going into 2025 based on what we've learned. What would you go for? Challenge the action standards / success criteria with clients a bit more. Yeah, I think it's a key one for me. Yep.
Mine would be to consider the cultures where we're doing the research in and getting input from the local fieldwork team or translations, inputting that into the questionnaire and building a bit more time to really develop that questionnaire and make sure it's suitable for the markets that we're doing the research in.
Just give that extra little bit of thought to your questionnaire and your metrics and your action standards, and just reflect on, like, are they really representing the cultures and the markets that you're trying to do well in? And then I think the one I would add is just being proud of the work that R&D and product and sensory is doing in sustainability, because genuinely, as someone who does sort of go a bit broader in my research background, it has dropped off a lot of radars of other departments. So I think there's a huge opportunity for R&D and sensory to lead the way, and to actually carry the likes of marketing and commercial teams forwards and be the departments that make a big difference. I think that's a really cool thought to take into next year, and carry the flag of sustainability. All right. So we'll leave it there. Hopefully that's given you something practical to think about and wasn't just the three of us blathering on. We certainly had an interesting time chatting and trying to get into the practical details behind all the themes that are going on. And that's something that we'll continue to do in these sessions in the future. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.